This is Dr. Marty Lerman, welcoming you to our next program, our new program, with mental wellness as our theme and topic, and breathing, which now becomes even more important as we seem to be getting a rebound of the virus coming at us from lots of different places. And we're going to spend some time today going into a couple of issues that have come up from the emails that have been coming in, which we are very, very thankful and grateful to receive. And what I'd like to pick out are two different topics that seem to be running more in terms of questioning what is it and what do I do with it and how does it affect me, and interesting kinds of questions. The first one deals with the issue of common sense. Apparently those two words have been bantered around quite a bit recently by people trying to justify their positions, their arguments, their conspiracies, their whatever, thinking that somehow that creates a center of authenticity to whatever they're saying because they can put it in terms of, well, it's common sense, and sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. So we're going to actually spend some time talking about what is common sense and why do we seem to have an absence of it more often than not. Second thing we're going to deal with is the whole issue of conspiracies, because that also has been a topic of three of the emails that we got from people who are saying, I'm sick and tired of hearing people's opinions, especially when there's no facts to support it, but yet they seem to think there is and they argue about it, and it makes no sense to me. How do I get away from it? We're going to talk about how to get away from that stuff, because really the solution's quite simple. Actually, I'll tell you what it is right now. Turn off your Facebook. It's amazing how well you can get rid of conspiracy theories. And stay away from media that does not present news, but presents opinions and different perspectives and opinions and people's ideas and soapboxes and all that kind of nonsense. If you want to watch the news, but be careful that most of the stuff you're watching at night is not news, it's interpretation. So that in a nutshell should answer a lot of the questions about what do I do to avoid conspiracies. I also want to talk a little bit about the work that we did last week when we had Shannon Moser with us talking about the unconscious reality therapy, which apparently is gaining some interesting response from folks, both professional mental health workers as well as from people out in the public. And a couple of ministers wrote in wanting more information about how they can learn about what this actually can do for folks, because it has such an appeal in terms of presenting logical information to people in a way that isn't necessarily logical, but it comes across as a simple to implement strategy, which is something we have been missing for quite a while, because unfortunately a lot of the perception that the public has about mental health and mental health services is that it's very complicated, it requires a long time, it costs a lot of money, insurance companies dictate what you can and can't do, you have people pushing medications on you whether you need them or not. And there's a lot of mythology connected with mental health that unfortunately puts people in a place where they opt out of receiving services even though they desperately need them. So what we want to do is kind of clear away all of this nonsense about what mental health services actually can be, what they actually are, and how people can access help. Because right now we need a lot of folks getting help. We have anxiety issues coming off the wall between the virus issues going on, the things that are going on in our cities, things that are going on now in the rural areas, trying to understand what the issues are about police and how they can be more effective and how they need to get rid of some bad attitudes and all that kind of stuff. And it creates stress. And we have spent a great deal of time talking about how people can manage stress better, and yet we still run into lots of situations where people are coming unglued. And what we want to do is get the glue back working again, obviously, because we need people to be of sound mind, being able to make good choices and good decisions for themselves and their families, and at the same time starting to enjoy life. We've gone a long time. I have people coming into my office saying, do I get to have a vacation this year? And I'm looking at them saying, yeah, I suppose you can. And then I look in the mirror and ask myself, do I get to have a vacation this year? And it's like, I don't know. And yet we run into these situations continuously of wanting to take care of ourselves, claiming that we are taking care of ourselves, and yet we're not taking care of ourselves. So we're seeing it in lots of different ways that are all reflecting stress, tension, anxiety, and things that we need to be better in control of. So we're going to talk about all this different kind of stuff, as well as to entertain your emails and to let you know that somewhere over the horizon, on the other side of the moon, perhaps as early as next week, we may actually have telephone access. So I know I whispered that intentionally just to get Bob smiling as opposed to frowning, which is always a good thing. So our special thanks go out to the folks that are hosting us, which is the radio station On Air, which is KAIR.com. And as we're putting this out to Bob and Linda Robertson, I thank you for giving us the time to be able to share positive messaging about mental wellness as opposed to mental illness. So we're going to move forward with the programming, and I'm going to respond to a couple of real quick ones. One funny, I got an email about an email. Last week I happened to mention that we got emails about a dog running loose in somebody's subdivision and what we should do about it. And I got more emails in response to that than I got emails about some of the topics we actually covered, which is kind of cute. And I don't know, the answers to all that kind of stuff. You call your policing agency, you call your subdivision people. Hopefully they will take care of it for you. Or you can throw some treats out to the dog and maybe they'll be nice to you. I don't have an answer for you, but it's not the kind of stuff we deal with routinely here. Or you can call a vet. I guess that would be another option. So it's interesting. Second issue that came in is I have no idea what you do about vehicle registrations. Why we got an email for that, I don't know. However, there are state offices that I assume are still open, even with the virus stuff. I'm pretty sure they're open again because I think the governor opened up all of that stuff. It may take a long line. I have no idea how they're doing that stuff, but we don't deal with state registrations, nor do we deal with car insurance policies. And I wish, mine was kind of better. I was joking this morning that we changed a little bit of the coverage on our policy, same carrier, and yet we got 4 different new declarations in the mail, and none of them are the same. Trying to figure out how we got 16 pages of absolute gobbledygook that repeated itself all over the place, and not to mention the postage cost of what that all amounts to. But in any event, we're going to not deal with that kind of nonsense because that nonsense exists all the time. It doesn't go away. Our dilemma is we're bombarded with nonsense, and whether it's bogus calls from telemarketing people or scam artists that are trying to get us to spend money on things that don't exist, all of that builds to this thing that we call stress. And in order for us to really manage stress, we have to be aware of what it is we're being exposed to so we can take proactive steps as opposed to just getting headaches and basically wanting to vomit in people's faces over the telephone, which somebody told me they actually threatened to do to somebody. And the other person basically cussed them out on the other end. Normally just click you out, but this guy took exception to it and started swearing profusely, to which the woman basically just hung up at that point and then called her son to do something about it. And I guess the question to the son was, what were you supposed to do? Because, again, we're dealing with situations beyond our control that we're being exposed to. And too many of us are getting hurt because we fall gullible to this stuff. And we need to understand that our gullibility does not make somebody else pay. It simply means that we need to understand what's happening to us because that's the part we can control. So as we move into the show today, we're also going to talk about a couple of issues that came up as a result of the show with Shannon last time, dealing with our unconscious reality therapy. So I will hopefully be able to clarify that information for you. And as we're coming up to our first break of the show, we're going to pass on our contact information because people can still send us emails. Actually, that'll be the way to communicate to us directly because we know that system works because we've been getting your emails and we respond to them. So we'll talk about that when we get on the other side of the break. The happiest time that we can identify right now really are our happiest times, and we're going to talk about happy times too because there's a value to getting that joy back into our perception of what's real. So we're going to take the break, and when we get back, we shall talk more. Welcome back. This is Doc Marty with Mental Wellness. We're going to spend some time talking about common sense. The emails that came in about that were basically in response to a lot of the verbiage that's being thrown out across the media about people either having it, not having it, what to do with it, what not to do with it, why we're missing it, and all that kind of stuff. And we have an interesting perspective that common sense, unfortunately, isn't common anymore, which is not an original quote from me, but it's been said by many people, including my grandfather about 50 years ago. Because what we understand to be common, or what we want to understand as being common, is the perception that everybody, or most everybody, has the same perception. That somehow that sense, which is logic and reason, is shared by many, many people. Therefore, it is held in common. That definition, which is an interesting one by dictionary terms, unfortunately, has not been the actual application because, at least in this culture, what we assume to be common sense is our ability to think like other people because there's an agenda or a belief that is being promoted, and if you're not on board with it, you have no common sense. So it's been used as a way of kind of smacking people over the head to get on board with whatever is building or wanting to be built in terms of doing certain things. There was a big uproar during 1944 and 45 when the federal government instituted its rationing program in order to keep Americans more focused on being part of the war effort to support things rather than using consumable products like gasoline and metals and certain foods, so people would ration their purchasing. And the argument against it was that it made no common sense. Nobody with any common sense would ever possibly want to ration people's ability to do whatever they thought that they had a God's right to do. And that was the beginning of what we were later to find out. It was kind of a libertarian movement back in the 40s, because supposedly individuals should have the right to do whatever they want to do, and as long as it doesn't infringe on anybody else's health or welfare, therefore it should be allowed. It's kind of a warped perception, which thank goodness didn't last very long. But the understanding is the common good is not necessarily common sense, because we get into interpretations of what's common good and what's common sense. And unfortunately, what we end up with is a presentation that oftentimes is based on opinion. And there's no way to prove what is common sense, only what we assume to be because a lot of people believe it. So we have different issues that come up continuously. And the referencing for common sense, at least in this society, goes way back to an American revolutionary figure by the name of Thomas Paine, who wrote a pamphlet, later transferred into books, I think 2 or 3 different books, that were simply titled Common Sense, because his want was to explain to the colonies people that there were certain things that we needed to do in a united front. And one of them was not to capitulate with the King of England, who was dictating to us what we could and couldn't do. So in a sense, it was kind of promoting the issue of the revolution, but trying to do it in a very intellectual way that would appeal to a mass group of people to be able to understand. The pamphlet originally was 17, 18 pages long. It really wasn't a long book, but it was actually designed to awaken people's awareness of what was going on and to rally the support, because it was wanted to be a commonly perceived value, that things needed to be done for the common good. And the book caught on. The pamphlet caught on. It spread all over the place. I believe was it Ben Franklin with his printing system actually printed the thing out and circulated out hundreds and hundreds of copies of the thing without charging anybody any money for it. It was just handed out so people could read it. Interestingly enough, a lot of the redcoats, the British read it, and they thought it was a really interesting concept. And many of them switched from being British sympathizers to actually being on the colony side, which was an interesting kind of switching thing for what was going on back in the late 1700s. So we have this perception that there's this universal understanding of what's right and what's wrong. And if we have common sense, we understand it. Unfortunately, we don't have that. We do have some commonly agreed to ideas that are part of the Constitution, part of our most cherished documents that represent our country. And there's other things that we have that pertain to certain common sense issues that deal with spirituality, certain universal concepts that we believe to have common value everywhere. So we have this interesting play of words, because what is common to us may not be common to other people. We have certain traditions, we have certain behaviors, we have certain attitudes that, because a lot of us share them, we assume they're common, and to us they are, but to other civilizations, other cultures, other groups of people, they're not. And yet we run into these conflicts because for what they may perceive as common opens up a whole area of hopefully discussion and clarification rather than opposition and war, which we have taken positions on many, many times. It's like trying to understand concepts like white privilege and understanding what racism is. From the perception of somebody who's been subjugated to those things, their perception of what's common is very different than what those of us who've never been subjugated to that might have, even though we may be sympathetic to those folks. We may have a certain compassion, some empathy toward that. And then there are other people that just have none, and yet they totally perceive things very differently and want to argue against what other people's perception of common is. So what we're wanting to be able to do, if we're going to resolve a lot of the current issues that we're running into that represent polarity and divisiveness, is to begin to pull together what is in common and to actually dialogue with folks so the positions that we have are not considered absolutes. They're not considered the only perception or the only valid one or the only right one. and we begin to understand perceptions from other people who hold common need with us, that we maintain a civilization, that we maintain civility, that we maintain basic respect and understanding for each other, rather than going into these opposite camps where we want to go to war with people because they're presenting themselves as different than ours. So the critical question that we run into is, how do we build in commonality and yet mutual respect and still maintain a sense of identity and purpose and value so that we all move forward and it doesn't become us versus them. It doesn't become we're better than them. It doesn't become a competitive value thing where some of us get certain things and some of us don't. We want to get rid of that crap because there's no value to an unnecessary disadvantage world in which we can all prosper and we can all do well because it's not a situation of a limited source of value. We have values that are universal to everybody. And if we can start understanding what actually is in common, then we actually can make sense out of things. And the absence of that is what creates the disparity. So in terms of understanding where we're going with common sense, rather than just bantering around those two words as if they have some implied meaning to them, which only certain people may understand, what I'm proposing is we begin to open up the dialogue to it. What is common to everybody, and what makes sense to everybody? And we start building from that platform rather than the divisiveness that we're currently representing in different positions. And in order to do that, there has to be a coming of the minds, a way of building together a sense of purpose and mutual understanding. So in doing that, one of the interesting things that spins from it is that we begin to mentally start focusing on goodness. Because as we start to celebrate ourselves with other people as they're celebrating themselves, the positive energy that tends to create is a want for understanding and respect. And we begin to learn things of other cultures. We begin to take on characteristics. We understand that there's certain values that are presented to us that have inherent goodness to them. And if we look at the arts, if we look at the impact of media, of music, of dance, of all the different forms of fine arts as well as graphic arts, we start to appreciate the understanding that a lot of that is shared commonality. And it's valued for what it is. That's what allows us to sit and enjoy music from different cultural periods. It allows us to enjoy artwork from different eras. It gives us that sense that there is something in common to everybody. So part of what we're looking at is actually building in that sensational understanding of what's real rather than what we fear. And that is where we're going with common sense. So hopefully we've answered that. And again, I encourage you to let us know. You can send me an email, docmarty61@gmail.com. It's DOCMARTY61@gmail.com. You can also send us stuff in through the radio station at www.radiokair.com. And when we come back from the break, I'll even share some information with you about how you can reach us through YouTube and podcasts and lots of other ways, because right now we're building an audience of people who are concerned and caring and wanting to move forward with their lives. So we're going to take the break, and we'll be back on the other side. This is Doc Marty with Mental Wellness, welcoming you back again. And we have had a couple of requests for things about how people can access us, which I'm going to share with you right now, because we have podcasts going out all over the major platforms. Every single one of them, I've been told, 7 of them, 8 of them, whatever there are. They're probably not all major, but the major ones plus a few. And I know we're being picked up by iTunes, we're being picked up by Google, we're being picked up by YouTube, and it's kind of interesting. YouTube doesn't do podcasts, do they? No, they don't. They just have videos. You're right. We're on videos, too. You can get us off YouTube. Actually, the easiest way to get us, if you want to see me doing this, I know radio is kind of an interesting way of presenting information, but if you actually want to see me doing this, not that I have the greatest face or the greatest bod to look at, and certainly I'm not all that animated. I'll do my hands, and I'll take my glasses when I'm reading and put them on, take them off. But apart from that kind of visual presentation, if you want to see the YouTube, you're more than welcome. All you have to do is to go into the channel, which is by the radio. So you go into radiokair.com, and you'll see the page with all the different things, all the different YouTube presentations. And over on the left side, you can scroll down and you start looking for Doc Marty Mental Wellness. This is episode 29, if I got that right. I'm questioning. We had 28 last time, didn't we? So it's 29? It's either 20 or 20. No, 28 was with Shannon last week, so 29. And that's what we're doing right now. So if you happen to click on that one, you'll be able to hear me maybe duplicating myself twice. But however you present that, is really cool. Or you can let other people know so that they can watch as well. And the other episodes, which is how they're referred to off of the YouTube, it's got lots of stuff. We're naming these shows because I think it's a great way to be able to figure out what you might want to listen to or watch. This one is simply called Common Sense. And the idea behind presenting this information is that you actually have some things to watch and look at. We've been passing on tools for how people can manage stress, how people can get rid of fear, some of the social awkwardness that a lot of folks are experiencing because they've been confined for, going on 3 months now, and wondering, how do I get back and start socializing with people, realizing that Facebook is not a real effective means for relationships, and friendships that are established on Facebook typically are not friendships, as we all know that, unless you already had the friendship with somebody and you're using Facebook as a means to communicate. But we're also discovering there's far more effective ways to communicate with people. Telephones, for some strange reason, cell phones, if you actually call somebody and talk to them live, it's an amazing kind of experience, and we're losing the impact of that because it's easier to type things out on a little tiny keyboard and make all kinds of misspelled words and have all these different, kinds of things interpret what we're trying to write, and then we look at it ourselves and went, oh my goodness, I don't believe I really sent that. So the verbal stuff is interesting. We also have the video presentations, the ways that you can actually appear on a screen and talk to people, which is also kind of an interesting phenomena as far as communications. However, the critical issue that we have to be understanding is that these communication technology tools that we're using do not define relationships. All they are is ways of communicating. If you want a relationship with somebody, you're going to actually have to meet with them. There is a presence that we derive from being face-to-face with somebody, which right now is somewhat hampered because we have to maintain distancing and we have to have masks on. And yet we still know that the physical presence of somebody in our immediate vicinity is the best way for us to establish contact and to feel connected. How this relates to what we're going through is really part of the dilemma we're running into, because we're losing that sense of closeness and we're losing the sense of relationship value because we're not having that energetic exchange of what it means to feel attached to somebody. We're coming up on Father's Day, and one of the most difficult things that I am going through right now is the awareness that I am not going to be physically around my 4 kids to hug them. And for those of you who know me, you know that I am a hugger. And not having my kids in general proximity to be able to hug them is a very difficult experience for me because I'm not connected to them. I don't feel that same energy with them as I do when I'm doing stuff over Zoom or one of the other kinds of platforms that may be available for communication. So the point I'm trying to make is that understanding that we do communicate, we can communicate, but it doesn't define relationship. We need to have that presence in order to feel the energy. So we do feel some energy with folks, but for most of us, it's the actual physical closeness that allows us to feel it. It's one of the reasons why hugging somebody releases chemistry in the brain that doesn't ordinarily get released. And a 15-second hug with somebody that you love releases oxytocin. And it doesn't get released by talking to somebody over media or social media. So it's just one of those interesting observations that we do get continuous calls from. And I know it affects people. It affected people on Mother's Day for moms not to be able to see their children and be hugged by them. We also know it's affecting elder care situations from people being quarantined away. And the adult children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren are not being allowed to interact with their family members because of the fear of the virus. And we have gone through many, many tragic situations of people passing away without being in the proximity of their families, which is, in many ways a very horrible way to die, knowing that you don't have those people with you. which is something that this culture has cherished as being one of those values. It's the whole basis of what palliative care is about. It's what hospice care is all about. And here we are going in the opposite direction of what that actually represents. So there's some things that are going on, again, which are increasing stress, that are increasing our disconnection. And we want to reverse that. We want to bring it back and do it in a safe way because we don't want to jeopardize people's welfare, people's health. So we want to be cognizant of it so that as we're moving toward it, we start to understand what it is we're dealing with here. And again, it becomes an issue of common sense. It's a shared value that we want to be representative. So the other question that came through real quickly that I know can't be really quickly handled is, how are we responding to conspiracies out there, of which there are a ton? Because anytime you have major divergent perceptions of what's real and what people should or shouldn't do as a result of what's real, we're going to have people spewing out different ideas and thoughts that they believe to be true. And we know that in many ways, what we end up with is people's individual perceptions of what they want to be real being presented as being, in fact, factual, when all they are a smattering of unrelated, interconnected kinds of things that don't really represent what people want them to represent. But when you have the pull, when you have somebody backing it, either financially or through media, it tends to get out. And the more it gets out, the more you'll find people who are wanting to align themselves with that thought without questioning whether it actually is or it isn't the truth. And then it gets presented because it's repeated so many times, you end up believing it because you've heard it from so many places in so many different ways that it takes on a credibility factor. And it's interesting because 25, 30 years ago, before social media existed, there were conspiracies, but they were also weeded out very effectively and very quickly because it was referred to as yellow journalism when they got popular support because it was based on minimally factual information. And the facts that are presented generally are either totally distorted things or they're little bits and pieces of a fact that are taken out of its context and then all of a sudden blown up into something that it's not. And that's generally what feeds into conspiracies. They generally are disproven, like the earth is still flat. I know that one's been floating around for roughly 2,000 years. And there are still people out there believing that the earth is actually flat, and everything about it has been distorted. And I'm not quite sure why it's being distorted, but there's people who just believe it. We have the doomsdayers out there that keep predicting certain dates based on either Mayan calendars or the movement of the planets in relationship to the sun, or any number of other factors that they assume because there's a piece of reality that might be connected to it that they can actually predict or attribute the prediction to somebody else that the Earth's going to come to an end at a certain time, a certain date. We went through the 2K scare. We've gone through the Mayan scare. We've gone through multiple scares. And what they're representing are different conspiracies about what people want to believe because they think that they have the answer. And to whatever degree they get support, it becomes popular, it becomes a conspiracy. It doesn't mean it's true. It simply means it's popular. And we run into that kind of perception a lot. So what we want to be able to do is to understand that not everything you see or read in the media is true. And your job is to research and find out what it is. So we're going to close out a program, and in the process of saying goodbye to people, we're also saying hello to some new people because the emails are coming in, which I really appreciate. We have folks out in Hawaii that are talking to other people in Hawaii. We have a listening audience in Hawaii. So welcome to all of you because we actually replay the program for folks out in Hawaii. It's on at 1 o'clock our time, which is Houston Central Time, and yet it's going out at 1 o'clock in the morning. We have the relaxation program that people can hear during the week, actually every other day, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And that goes out at 1 o'clock our time, which, interestingly enough, is about 8 o'clock in the evening. So as we close out the show, we're welcoming folks in from Europe as well as from Israel. I have one follower who sent me an email from Tel Aviv, and thank you, sir. I appreciate that. So we're going to close it out and wish everybody a good week and maintaining their own sense of common sense. Tune in next and we will take on more topics and hopefully a telephone program. Signing off for now, it's Doc Marty.